Hello, everyone, and welcome. I am very pleased to have Claudia Wenger as my guest today. Claudia's organization is called Claudia Cares Consulting and supports individuals with special needs and their families during the transition from school to adult services by structured assessment, goal identification, assessing adult services, and parent training. She has experience working in public and private schools and developing and managing adult services vendored by the Regional Center and the Department of Rehabilitation, with a focus on inclusion and self-determination. Claudia holds a bachelor's degree in education and a master's in special education from the University of Southern California. She has helped many families successfully launch their children with special needs into adulthood. Welcome, Claudia. I am so glad you could join me today.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be able to speak to you today.
So I understand that we're going to be discussing transition assessment and the Individual Transition Plan, or ITP, which is a part of the IEP, the Individual Education Plan, that the vast majority of young people with special needs have from their school. So to begin with, if you would, tell us, what is an individual transition plan, why is it needed, and what are the requirements for it?
ITP, Individual Transition Plan, is mandated by IDEA, which requires a secondary transition begin for sure by age 16 in all of the United States, although some states have mandated 14 years old. And the secondary transition is a plan for to support students to help them plan for their adult future. It addresses three specific points: education, employment, and sometimes, when appropriate, independent living skills. And the ITP is definitely a part of the IEP. And it should be in place by the student's 16th birthday at minimum. In states where it's not mandated to do it at 14, the IEP team could decide to start it earlier. So.
Okay, and it's also something that a parent could request, right? You could go to your IEP team and say, hey, can you please start my child's individual transition plan now and not wait until they have to do it, not wait until the 11th hour, right?
Sure, because a parent is part of the IEP team.
Mm-hmm.
So the parent could, the student himself, especially for students who are going to get a high school diploma, waiting till 16 years old is a little bit late to start planning for adulthood, because they might only have 2 more years left of school. So it would make much more sense to start at 14.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because a lot of parents don't realize that they can ask for these sorts of things, that it's not only the responsibility of the school to come to them and say, okay, it's time to do X, Y, or Z, that a parent can take the initiative themselves and go to their school, go to the IEP team and say, this is what I want. Sure. And I think that's a very important point for parents to be aware of.
Sure. Sometimes parents don't even realize that it's even happening before they're 16. Mm-hmm. It'll just be 1 or 2 pages at the end of the IEP and some goals written that just, sound nice, and there's nothing to argue about them, but not much has happened to get those goals.
So then how does the transition plan get completed? And also, if you could talk a little bit about why it's so important to get it completed and get it done and get it in place for the young person well before they graduate.
So the way it gets started is there's an assessment, and it's a process, the assessment, where there should be conversations with the teachers, the special ed teachers in particular, maybe the general ed teachers as well, about what the child's plan is, what is his hopes, his dream, what is he thinking about what he wants to do after high school. There should be conversations with the parents as well, and there should be some assessments as well, kind of to figure out where he wants to be or she, and what are the goals that would help them reach that goal. So that would occur during the assessment process, and then the goals would be written during the IEP to reflect the assessment results. And the reason it's so important is that up until 14, 15, 16 years old, most of the work done in school is very academic. And there isn't, it's more about learning as much of those skills as possible. The transition plan focus is thinking about the future and what kind of goals and plans does the individual or the individual and his family have for after high school. So if you don't make those plans, you're not necessarily learning those skills with that in mind.
So let's say, for example, the individual decided they wanted to go into computer science, or they wanted to go into some sort of artistic career or something like that. The team could structure the classes that they take toward that goal, and also are extracurricular types of things incorporated into this plan as well, or is it just the core curriculum at the school?
It's anything that involves the individual, so including like adaptive skills and independent living skills. But one of the main things that's so important is to understand is the individual's self-determination. Are they able to make goals? Are they able to break those goals down and meet those? Because as an adult, the more you are able to be self-determined, which means being able to create your own goals and follow them, the more likely you are to succeed as an adult. And so therefore that is a very important part of the transition assessment, is to figure that out. Does the child need more support in that area so that he can prepare for the future? And anything that's involved around preparing for the future would be part of the goal system. So if extracurricular is what's going to help the individual become ready for his adult life, then that would be a part of it.
So then what happens once the assessment is done? Let's say the assessment is done. What's the next step?
The next step would be a meeting, an IEP meeting, and you want it to be before the 16th birthday, so that there's time for it to be in effect. And during the IEP meeting, the goals would be reviews. They need to be measurable post-secondary goals, and the goals do need to be based on age-appropriate assessment. And it has to be person-centered. It's about the individual being assessed, and then those goals would be set at that IEP meeting.
Person-centered. Now that is kind of a buzz term that we've heard a lot about, but not everyone really knows what that means. A person-centered program, what does that refer to?
It means that the individual, the student, the child, the learner, there's all sorts of different ways, the consumer, is the one who is making those decisions about what he or she wants to do, that they're part of that process. In other words, an IEP meeting can't occur and shouldn't occur without the child being a part of that and making decisions and helping to the best of their ability to be a part of that process. So it's that's being done to them, in other words.
Right, it's being done with their participation, which actually leads me to my next question, which is, so who is involved in this process, and what are the basic elements that must be considered as a part of the process?
So the IEP participants would be the student, the parents, the general ed, the special ed teacher, an administrator. If there's any related service personnel would be involved as well. And there also could be regional center representative and a DOR representative involved in that IEP meeting.
Is the parent allowed to ask other people that they feel are important, that they want to have as a part of the process? They can also invite people to the meeting. Is that correct? It's not just the people that the school says are allowed to attend. Is that right?
Yes, that's true for all IEP meetings. This one is really no different. Anything that is permitted in a regular IEP would be permitted in this IEP.
All right. And so what sort of a timeline are we looking at? For if we look at sort of the pre and post transition moment that happens, what sort of a timeline for the IEP and all of that are we looking at in a student's high school career?
Well, first of all, it's going to be very individualized. So there isn't going to be any hard and fast rules. That's number one. Number two, it's changing. It's not, you don't sit down before, let's say, the 14th birthday and decide this individual is going to do this, or the individual himself says, well, I want to do X, Y, Z. He might change his mind, and he might change his mind several times, and that's okay too. They're young.
Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't sit before ninth grade, for example, create a plan, and then in 10th grade say, oh, no, but you said this last year, so now you have to do it. It can change. But in the first year, there's going to be some career exploration, some career planning, potential some job shadowing, community activity to kind of see in terms of a job whether the individual is going into the right direction. In 10th and 11th grade, there might be a little bit more involvement, more community hours, more volunteering involved, maybe some education in school or through the school, and maybe paid employment after school. But again, it's very dependent on the individual. Some kids, especially kids who are going to be in the school system through 22, that may not happen in 10th, 11th grade. That may happen a year or two later. So it depends if they're also high school diploma bound, college bound, or if they're career bound, in which direction this is going to go. So.
Right, if they were let's say, in a certificate program as opposed to a diploma track.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
Okay.
It would not look exactly the same for everybody. And it doesn't look the same every year for even an individual. There is a lot of room for changes. That's what's important. The big part here is to have the conversation, to have the assessments over and over again, and also have some skills that actually work towards that, measurable skills that are real. I've seen goals that say, oh, he wants to live with his parents. Is that forever? No, not forever, but right now, 14, 15, yeah, he does. But what are the skills that he would need to learn to move out? Does he know how to use public transportation? Does he know how to budget money? Does he know how to follow a schedule? Is he able to make his own goals and decisions? That in itself is a skill, and that's what I was talking about with self-determination. It's really important for the individual himself to be able to be a part of that process, but if he doesn't know or she does not know how to make decisions, then it's going to make it much more difficult to sit down and say, what do you want to do? They're not decisions based on his interests, his skills, his abilities, desires, and so forth. So that's where self-determination is very important, and those are goals in itself. And that's a new buzzword. That's kind of new. It's been around for a long time, but it seems to be making a bigger show more recently, and it is part of the process.
It sounds to me also like it's very important to discuss both long-term and short-term goals as a part of this process so that you see what's going to happen in the very near future, but you also see what you're working towards down the road.
Correct.
Right? Identifying both of those things.
Correct.
It sounds like it's pretty important to do something like that. So let's say you don't agree with something that's come out of the assessment, or you don't agree with something in the transition plan or in the IEP meeting. What do you do? How do you handle that when there's something that you either don't agree with or that you want changed?
Well, this is similar to almost any IEP. You don't have to sign an IEP if you don't agree with it. If the school's responsive and is going to be willing to go back and do the assessment, in that conversation agrees to do that assessment and go back and do it. What I have found more is that assessments are really kind of incomplete. They'll give a checklist to the student. He'll check it out, and then they'll come in and they'll write 3 goals. Something like the student wants to live with his parents, or the student wants to go to junior college when he's done with high school, or he wants to continue working in retail, and that's, our goals, we're doing those kinds of things, and that's part of his everyday. And the parent's looking at this going, well, this isn't all much of anything. You could well, this assessment doesn't seem to complete, and see if the school will step up and do an appropriate assessment. If not, you could ask for an IE, an individualized assessment, a private assessment, and for a transition assessment to be provided that way. But you may need at that point to work with an advocate.
Okay, so if, let's say, as a parent, I don't agree with something that the school wants to put into the IEP or into the transition plan, my first step would be to let them know, hey, I don't agree with this, and I want to change, or this is what, I do want, this is what my child wants, this is what we'd like to have changed or clarified. If the school at that point refuses to do so, then I would take that next step and perhaps request a private assessment, go through that IEE process, get a private assessment, perhaps consult, as you said, find a good advocate, consult with an advocate. Or there's also something called a fair hearing, is there not? If you cannot resolve a particular disagreement that you have on the lower levels, shall we say, you can escalate it to something called a fair hearing. Is that correct?
You can. So let me back up a little bit. Let's say you're sitting in the IEP meeting, the school's presented, this is what we did for the transition assessment, or maybe they don't even talk about it, and you ask, what's going on with the transition assessment, and they show it to you, and you look at the goals, and you go, well, these don't seem like very much. I really, what about this or what about that? And let's say they work with you on changing the goals, then you're fine. If you're looking at their assessment and saying the assessment doesn't look right to me, it looks incomplete. If the school's willing to go on and do an assessment, great. If they're not, you can ask for an independent educational evaluation. You can request that IEE of a transition assessment, and that would be an outside entity. But most likely at that point, you do need to work with an advocate. You might need to go into a fair hearing to make to request it. It depends on the school. They're not always willing to have these private outside assessments. That's not their first goal. So they're not necessarily going to agree to it right away. Or they may actually agree to do it. And then when they do their own assessment again, you can evaluate it. Is this really assessing my child properly? Are they wasting time? You'd have to kind of figure out, is the problem the assessment or is the problem the goals? If the assessment was well done but you don't agree on the goals, that's a little bit different.
Right. And so then you would simply ask them to make a change in terms of the goals that they've outlined.
Correct. And then the question is, can the school that the student currently is in, can they actually meet those goals? Is it the right environment to meet those goals? And that could be another issue.
Well, if it isn't the right environment, then what would you do? You would actually have to go through the process of investigating and requesting another school placement.
Exactly.
Right. Which can be quite an onerous task in and of itself.
Correct. But often all these things kind of come together, and it does go back really to the assessment. Because if the school did an assessment and wrote goals, they're doing an assessment and writing goals for the program that they're providing. So it usually goes back to that IEE, the independent educational evaluation. Go, no, we don't agree with your evaluation, we don't agree with your goal, and we don't agree with your potential placement either.
Well, the important thing, it sounds like, is all of this is part of planning for the child's future and making sure that, as you say, that they are in the right educational environment that can provide them with that support and those classes and that structure that they need in order to succeed and work towards those goals. And it really is the parent's place or the caretaker's place, whoever is the person who is assisting and representing that child in the meeting, to make sure that all those elements are in place and working like they're supposed to. It's not just up to the school. I think what we're underscoring here is that the parent must be an active part of this process to ensure that their child is getting the things that they truly need to succeed.
Correct. So I would say that the simplest first steps would be that prior to your child's 14th or 16th birthday, before that IEP, parents usually get a letter telling them that certain assessments are going to be done. You know, sometimes it's a lot more intensive when it's a 3-year, less when it's an annual. But somewhere in that list, there should be some indication that an transition assessment is being done. And when you don't see that information written, then that's where the call to the school is. Hey, what's going on? What are you doing for the transition assessment? And then you start understanding what the school does or doesn't do in this area. And that will lead you to figure out, do I need to be how involved and how intense it needs to be at that moment? Because if the school has a process and has some ways that they're handling it, then you can wait and see what goes on. And you can also request for the results prior to the IEP meeting. That's always a good idea. So if they're doing some assessments, you can get that information in advance and take a look to see so you're prepared to when you're walking into that IEP.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great idea. I know that that's something that I've always done myself. Back when my son was in high school, I would always make sure that I got a copy of all of those assessments prior to the meeting to make sure that I had a chance to review them and formulate any questions or issues that I had before going into the meeting so that I could be prepared and really utilize that time to its best advantage.
So that's helpful. I think the other complication is that when you're sitting at that IEP, let's say a 14-year-old or a 16-year-old, you're still focusing on what's going on academically and the support that they're needed to succeed academically. And the transition assessment is it's at the back of the IEP, and I think it's treated that way sometimes at the back. Valuable time is lost because it's like the last page. And so by then you're exhausted and you forget about it. So you can request a second IEP to complete a second meeting to complete that if you feel that that isn't properly or completely being addressed, because it's almost its own plan. You know, your child may need support in English or may need extra this or extra that and getting pulled out for whatever it is they're getting to complete their academics, but that's not necessarily working towards a transition plan.
So rather than treating it as an afterthought, give it the importance that it deserves.
Correct.
Is what you're saying.
Right. And once you do that, then the school will understand, okay, this parent understands that there's something here. Unfortunately, it hasn't received the attention that it should in many IEPs, and then students are getting ready to finish school or finish even at age out at 22, and very little has been put into that. Little effort has been put to preparing for that. And then between school ends and life begins, and there's a void.
Right. All of a sudden, there they go, falling off the edge of the cliff and not knowing where they're going to land. And it's nice to know when that time comes and, when high school does end, have an idea at least what's going to happen going forward from there.
Right. So there's two pieces here. There's that the process of the transition and the goals that occur in the school, and then there's that second piece, the months leading up to the end of schooling, whether it's 18 or 22, and it varies depending on the individual and the individual's needs and future. But preparing for that is really vital, because then goals are being addressed. Independence goals, adaptability goals, and so forth.
All right. Well, Claudia, there's some very, very important points that have come out in this conversation that I think parents definitely should be aware of. Is there anything else that you'd like to add that our listeners should definitely know or be aware of before we conclude? And if they want to reach out to you, if they have any further questions, how can they do that?
Well, as a final point, what I think is probably the most important is to understand that the transition process takes time. It does not happen the last 6 months of school. Just like even a typical kid, if he's going to go into college after high school, those thoughts and that process starts at the beginning, actually at the end of 8th grade. Usually the counselor sits down with the student, the parents involved, there's usually a signature involved there, where do you want to go? And classes are chosen for 9th, 10th, 11th grade based on some of those ideas that the child has in 8th grade. It's no different for a child with disabilities. It does begin. You have to start thinking about what's going to happen after high school, 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade for sure. So that's the first thing, is that you have to do that. You have to be a part of that and have to be aware of it. And the second part is to also recognize that it changes. How many of us went to college and changed our majors, half a dozen times?
Right. Nothing is set in stone.
Correct. But it's part of the conversation, because the conversation exists, because those assessments exist, because the goals exist. Because of that existence, the changes can occur. And that thought process can be put into place. So that's really important. And I can be reached in a couple of different ways, via email or phone. My email is consulting@claudiacares.com, and I can also be reached at 818-345-6313.
And would you repeat that phone number one more time, as people are scrambling to get pens and things to write it down? If you repeat it one more time.
Yes. My phone number is 818-345-6313, and my email again is consulting@claudiacares.com.
Okay, consulting@claudiacares, ClaudiaCares.com, correct?
Yep, exactly. That's also my website, Claudia Cares.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Claudia, for joining me today and for the very helpful information that you've shared. I also want to thank our listeners for spending a part of their day with us. I'm Gilda Evans, reminding you to take care of yourself and that special person in your life.